Hi, I'm Chris, and today I'm going to be talking about democracy as a form of government and its philosophical roots in ancient Greece, its development during the Enlightenment, and some of the challenges presented to democracy in the present day, and some alternative forms of government that may in fact function to bolster the cause of democracy as a system of government and as a global issue that functions to put forward the needs of different peoples and different interests. So democracy was first a kind of experimental form of government that was instituted in ancient Greece and ancient Athens. Democracy was also employed in the formation of the United States in the 1700s, following the American Revolution, with the formation of the colonies and the writing of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So that much is pretty much common knowledge. The United States is classified as a democratic republic, which means that as a republic, representatives are selected to represent the wishes of the American people. So a republic is pretty similar to a democracy, but a democracy is directly representative, while a republic is indirectly representative. In the past few hundred years, there have been new forms of government, alternative forms of government that have developed and that have seen varying degrees of implementation and success. You have communism, socialism, more recently libertarianism, and there was anarchism, which I think had a popular representation in Russia, or relatively popular representation in Russia, with figures such as Kropotkin. Today, most Western industrialized countries have instituted what would be considered democratic governments. Even though there's a large number of countries that have constitutional or parliamentary monarchies, such as the United Kingdom, Spain, Japan, and the Scandinavian countries. But these countries are basically considered democracies. They're classified as democracies, in fact. So although we still have monarchies and we still have kings and queens and stuff, we still have these countries are classified as democracies. So there have been a few representatives of the cause of democracy, largely in philosophical spheres of influence, that have suggested that democracy is the ultimate goal or ultimate result of the development of societies. Kant was writing in the 18th century, and he wrote a book called Perpetual Peace that suggested that democracy would eventually be the most common form of government and the most popular form of government, and would overtake other forms of government throughout the globe, and that the widespread governance of democratic countries would lead to a perpetual peace. In the 20th century, Albert Einstein said that there should be a world government, a democratic world government, and that led to the formation of the United Nations. So there have also been some alternative forms of government that have been created in the 19th and 20th centuries, notably fascism, communism, socialism, and a little bit more recently, libertarianism. The 20th century political philosopher Leo Strauss wrote that he thought that liberalism appears to agree with communism as regards its ultimate goal, while it radically disagrees with the way to the goal, which is a universal and classless society. So I myself think that democracy shares a lot in common with the goals of alternative forms of government that have appeared, such as communism and socialism. And so I would tend to agree with Leo Strauss that the goals of communism and liberalism may be related. Because liberalism, in the sense that the Democratic Party is liberal today, tends to be more maternal towards society, while whereas the Republican Party tends to be more paternal, or views its goals as less nurturing and more. There is this moral aspect of conservatism. But so if we turn to the similarities between liberalism and socialism, I think that Marx talks a lot about alienation, or he mentions alienation in a salient way. He talks about the alienation of labor. And I think that that is an issue that is pretty universal to liberalism. It represents kind of the problem of persecution of women, minorities, speaks to the liberal value of equal rights and equal representation. So I kind of tend to think that although communism has expressed itself, especially in the 20th century, as an authoritarian form of government, I think that in the seminal writings of Marx and Engels, and other thinkers, where I think that the implementation of communism as an actual form of government has perhaps gotten away from the values that are held by the writers, the philosophers that have envisioned these forms of government. So I tend to think of communism as a potential insulation against fascism for democracy. So I may be jumping around a little bit. I may be cutting corners, but I do think that because liberalism and communism share these goals of equal representation, of a universal society, I think that fascism is rather antithetical to democracy, to universal representation. So I think that, as far as fascism may have been almost prefigured in the writings of Hegel, and Marx was a member of the young Hegelian movement before he broke off from that movement and became a Marxist, and I think became opposed to Hegel. I think that, Hegel is often represented as a precursor to fascism, while Marx is, of course, represented as a precursor to communism, or as an active participant in the formation of communism. So I do tend to think that the goals, like Leo Strauss said, the goals of communism are pretty similar to those of liberalism. And I think that in that sense, communism could provide an alternative to fascism. While the planet in general, there are a lot of regions of the world that are not democratized, that may not even be industrialized. And to that extent, maybe the existence of more forms of government that share the goals of democracy, that share the goals of liberalism, may be an asset to such a state of affairs. So today you have, Vietnam is communist. You have North Korea, it calls itself communist, is basically an authoritarian government. You have China, which calls itself communist, and you have Russia, which considers itself communist, but is, of course, authoritarian. So that's kind of the way that the state of affairs internationally has developed, is that you have a lot of different regions that are, far removed from Western society. And a lot of these regions are not considered first world countries. They're not considered developed. They're considered developing. Eastern Europe is considered developing. A large part of Eastern Europe used to be under the control of the USSR. So there may be some remnants of that sort of socialist tendency in the Eastern European countries. And there may be, a little bit of Russian sympathizing sentiment in those countries. It may be very heterogeneous in terms of its sympathies. I think that money, there's the phrase "money changes everything," and I think that that is important to the politics of those regions. I think that Eastern Europe, as insofar as it is developing its societies and economies, I think it's important that money changes the psychology of societies, and if you're living in the midst of plenty, you're going to be more warmly acclimated to your own circumstances. So I tend to think that maybe Marx was conscious of this, that the development of less well-to-do societies may be able to be influenced by this socialist affinity, this tendency towards universal representation. And I think that that may be one of the underlying motivations behind Karl Marx representing himself as a communist. I tend to think of communism and Marxism as related but independent, lines of thought and ideology. So I think that insofar as perpetual peace, as per Immanuel Kant's conception of the tendency and the goal of civil society, I think that is a broad concern to have, and I think that insofar as the world is a very diverse and heterogeneous place, I think that the spread of democracy is a noble goal. I think that I think that Einstein was very keen and insightful in his conception of what became the United Nations. So those are my views on democracy. In conclusion, I would say that I think that it's important not to lose sight of the fact that democracy and socialism may have similar goals, similar objects, similar concerns. And I think that, it's possible to interpret the development of socialism, communism, and related political ideologies as potential allies of democracy. I think that social democracy with representatives such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think that all of those ideologies, which are basically leftist and are basically similar insofar as their ideas concern, related values. And I think that, to that extent, you could say that if communism is a long shot, if these different authoritarian governments have arisen in the 20th century, such as those of Russia and China and North Korea, I think that the existence of these rogue states can be detrimental to the reputation of these supposedly communist governments. I would say that myself, I tend to believe that democracy is the most stable form of government, the most sustainable form of government. But I can kind of understand the sympathies of communists, socialists, libertarians. I used to consider myself a libertarian in high school, but that kind of changed, and today I would say I'm more of a democratic socialist or a social democrat. I tend to be skeptical of whether laissez-faire economics can actually sustain a society, because I don't tend to believe that I don't tend to believe that large corporations are likely to look out for the interests of its workers or of the society itself. I think that when you have large amounts of money collected together in, say, corporate contexts, I don't think that those people are civilized, cultured enough to actually look out for the interests of the rest of society. I think that money is a temptation. So I don't tend to align myself with libertarianism so much anymore. I I was interested in the presidential bid of Ron Paul back in the day in like 2012 or whatever. I think he's an interesting guy, and a nice guy. I tend to think of Ron Paul as a pretty moral person and a pretty level-headed person. Overall, I tend to more resonate with the social democratic platform of Bernie Sanders. So those are my views on democracy as a form of government.